Registry Matters is an independent production. The opinions and ideas here are that of the hosts and do not reflect the opinions of any other organization. If you have a problem with these thoughts, FYP. Recording live from FYP Studios East and West, transmitting across the internet, this is episode 139 of Registry Matters. Larry, I feel like we've kind of already been doing something for a little while.
I think we have.
Okay, so coming up in a future section of the podcast that we're recording live now, but we're going to roll back in time, there is an interview with an individual about federal supremacy. Is that right?
That is what we were discussing, the federal supremacy in terms of the sex offender registration regimes.
Okay. And so I'll let, so that's about a 20-ish, 15-minute interview coming up later in the show. We have a usual cadre of a handful of articles, and then we have a couple, we have a decision, I think, and then another question coming out of Wyoming. All kinds of stuff going on tonight. New patrons. It's an exciting time to be in the podcasting business for PFRs. And
then we've got a dozen people in chat.
We do. It's also it's a good night of people in the Discords. How could people join the Discord, Larry?
You can become a patron for as little as $100 per month.
$100? Wow. Transcription person, can you replace that with $1? It is only $1, Larry. It's not 100.
Okay. Well, it doesn't hurt to be optimistic. And
it does not. That is definitely a true statement.
And I truly can't imagine anybody would be kind enough to give us $100 a month. But we have some very generous patrons, but $100 would be quite generous.
You say that. We have some people that are just shy of it, Larry.
Well, and then of course I'm asking for the second stimulus checks, but you have to create a $1,200. Now you're going to need to create a $1,200 one, and then you're going to need to create the maximum whatever family can get, because whatever it turns out to be the family maximum, you can create that.
So you could have 45 kids and you've capped out somewhere prior to that?
Yes, there's going to be a family max, and so we can put the $1,200 and then we can put the family max.
Listen, I can't even really comprehend and handle one child. How do people have 2 and 3 and 6? Those numbers don't make sense to me. I'm just not wired for to be around kids. They hurt me.
I don't understand it. I couldn't do it, but I'm glad they do it, because we need all we can to. I keep saying that they need to pay into these systems that us older folks have our paws out to get money from. We don't realize someone has to contribute so we can receive.
Let's go back to the stimulus check. Didn't you say it was gonna happen?
Well, I think I did, but a lot of folks have said it's going to happen. Yes.
And does that lead us down to announcing a Patreon extra this week?
Oh yes, we are going to have a Patreon. We're going to talk about the political lineup of what's going on between the president and the Senate and the House, and what's likely to ensue going forward. And I think it's just, for political junkies like me, I love it.
All right. And so we're going to record that after we record this tonight and get that. That'll come out Wednesday or Thursday. And again, if you want to listen to the Patreon extra, become a patron for as little as $1 a month, and you'll get, seriously, Larry, it's going to sound like I'm blowing smoke, but you really are an expert analyst at figuring this out. You may not like this political candidate. They may be your favorite, and you will pretty much treat them even. If you hate the person, but they do something smart, you will give them credit for being smart. And if somebody that you think is awesome and they do something dumb, you'll tell them that they've done something dumb. I don't know where else you can get this kind of detailed political analysis. So I think you're great.
Thank you, Andy. And we're going to talk about tonight some brilliance on behalf of the president. So that should inspire people to become a patron, to hear me talking about the brilliance of the president.
Okay. Sounds like a plan. All right, let's kick things off. I have no idea where I picked this up from. I don't know if it had to have come in from an email, but and I kind of neuter it to make sure that it's a little bit vague on who it is. But so here's one that says, just discovered y'all. Great job. Pretty much had this exact question about SORNA, and I think you answered it about my registration requirements expiring under SORNA after my 10 years. Even my tier 1 offense says 15. I read, and I'm in Texas. An attorney's page that said I would have to petition the court to undergo an evaluation that would determine if I could get off after 10 years. And I am wondering if that was a scam, as you said, or where I could find that information that says I will be off after the 10 years if I don't get into any more trouble. Also, there's a list of states that say if I would or would not be required to register after that 10 years. I'm waiting to maybe move to some better weather. Thank you for all that you do.
Well, I really like the question because it sounds like that part of what we've talked about may have been misconstrued. And what we talked about under the federal guidelines, a person as a Tier 1 can be released if the state chooses to adopt that particular aspect of the registration scheme. They can allow Tier 1s to simply vanish if they've completed those 10 years without any felony level conviction, and they've completed probation successfully and gone through treatment. I think those are the three main components. But that doesn't mean that the state is required to adopt that. And if the state doesn't adopt it, the federal law is meaningless because that was a recommendation to the states, and that was something the states are allowed to do but not required to do. So there is no mechanism that would automatically time you out because federal law says a Tier 1 offense is actually 15 years and there's a 5-year reduction permitted. But that doesn't mean it's in the statute of that state. And in terms of whether it's a scam in Texas, I can't say it's a scam, but I can say this. Texas has a very, very difficult process to be removed. All offenses are not eligible, and you have to go through some evaluation process that's CCOTS or something. I forget what it is. We should have Mary Sue from Texas come on, but there's an evaluation process you have to go through, and that entity has to give you the clearance, and then the court may grant it. And so you need to figure out if your offense disqualifies you from the get-go. You need to figure out if you think you can pass that evaluation process. And since I'm not intelligent enough to tell you about it, I've never conversed with a person who's gone through it. You would need to find out what that process is like. Then you would need to find out if the place where you're going to file the petition is disposed to let people be released from the obligation, assuming you're eligible and assuming you get that good evaluation. There's a lot of unknowns. So I would tell you before handing a bunch of money to an attorney, you need to talk to somebody in Texas. And Texas Voices, although there's only one person there who ends up trying to talk to everyone, that's Mary Sue Muller. Mary Sue does return phone calls. She does return emails. And she's a very nice lady. And she would probably be able to tell you, based on the geography of Texas, what part of Texas you're in. She could say, well, they never let anybody off there. And if you don't qualify from the get-go, why would you want to waste your money? So you need to figure out if you're even eligible.
Sounds
if your offense.
Can you double back? You were finishing something?
I say if your offense disqualifies you, there's no point to go forward.
Yeah, sure. But there was some feather ruffling, let's call it, of somebody in Texas sending out letters. Like, can we circle back to that real quick? Is that ethical of sending out letters like, hey, like, maybe you're on the registry, I can help you get off, or something like that? Is that ethical to do? Well, again, I'm assuming it is. I know it is. In my state, it is. Lawyer advertising was frowned upon in decades past. But as lawyer has become a business, and trying to keep a business afloat requires customers, lawyers have been allowed to advertise. And there's absolutely, in my opinion, nothing wrong with reaching out to people and letting them know that you exist and offering to provide your service. That in and of itself, I don't believe will be unethical in Texas. Where the ethics become compromised is when the person requires money in a large sum to tell you that you're not eligible, or if they don't bother to tell you you're not eligible, and they take your money knowing that you're not eligible. If you can look at this writer's offense and see that he's not eligible statutorily, you do not need to take any of his money. That can be eliminated in the initial screening. And if that's not what he wants to hear, he will call another lawyer and another till he hears what he wants to hear. And someone will eventually gladly take his money.
But that's what happens when you tell people they don't want to hear it. Oftentimes they keep calling and calling and calling. But there's nothing inherently wrong with sending out a lawyer advertisement. It has to be disclosed as a lawyer advertisement. And then, again, the lawyer needs to be ethical and tell you that you do or do not qualify. And they may need to do a consultation at a modest cost to tell you do not qualify, that you're not eligible. I mean, for them to dig deep enough into your facts, they may need to sit down with you and have some document review and do some analysis. And that is time. And time is all the lawyer has to sell.
That would be true. I mean, they don't, let's see, do they make tables and chairs? No, they don't make automobiles. Yeah, so all they have is like their intellectual property and their time. Got it.
That is correct. And when you get into a profession such as lawyering, there's a finite amount of time, and there's a lot of people competing for it, and there's a lot of overhead that goes with being a lawyer. And so they have to figure out some way to make a lot of their time produce income.
We have spoken, an attorney, I mean, probably even a cheap attorney is like $150 an hour, something like that, maybe. Is that fair?
That's really cheap these days.
Sure. But, so it doesn't take that many hours to burn up a $5,000 bill when an attorney is going to have to put in 20 hours of work or something like that. It just doesn't take that long to consume a pretty substantial amount of money at those kind of rates. But yeah, they did spend $150,000 on college.
That is correct. So just take a round fee of $250 an hour, and
Yes.
and you do a $5,000 fee. I mean, you got 20 hours. Well, in that 20 hours, let's say if we were going to do a registration petition in a state such as Georgia, to do it correctly, and the people have heard this podcast before, there's a lot of work goes into it. Now, it is cookie cutter. You do have a template for the petition of things you're going to plug into it. But to plug the stuff in, you've got to meet with your client to figure out what to plug in. And to do it right, you really need to make that journey to the prosecutor's office, at the very minimum by phone, if anybody takes phone calls anymore. But you need to have a deep conversation with the prosecution, figure out what their stance is going to be. And you need to prepare your witness to testify. The judge is going to want to hear from the person who's asking to be removed from the registry. That requires time. When you figure preparing the petition, investigating before you prepare the petition, meeting with the prosecution, talking with them, preparing your client for a hearing, conducting the hearing, and travel time, it doesn't take a lot to see how you can burn up 20 hours.
Right.
So, but I tell people when I say you're looking at a $5,000 fee, they roll their eyes, and I'm saying, well, if we had a petition process here, I can assure you that I would not quote anything less than that at this office, because to quote anything less than that, we couldn't do the work that would be required to do a thorough job. And then you're looking at a psychosexual evaluation on top of that. It would be strongly encouraged that you have a current eval.
Very good. Let's bounce over to a handful of news items, because these are just kind of funny, for the most part. Funny, haha, and funny, like, wow, that's really sad funny. But the first one comes from the ABQ Journal. Like, that's not how the alphabet goes. ABC. No, anyway, so this ABQ. So this from Albuquerque. Fugitive finally nabbed after 50 years on the lam. Larry, tell me about this, because this is in your neck of the woods.
Well, I just saw that on the front page of the Albuquerque Journal today, and I took a glance at it, and it looks like one of his relatives turned him in. He's been on the run for a long time. And so they finally...
Pretty sure I know your philosophy about the guy being on the run for so long. Like, go ahead and go through it.
Well, I don't see that he made any mistakes. You don't get to choose your relatives, so he didn't make a mistake there. But he was. You have to hand it to the guy. He escaped twice. Twice. Okay. Yes. He got out the first time, then he escaped the second time. Second time he did it right. Stayed on the run for nearly 50 years, and he's 77 years old now. And so I have to give the guy kudos.
But you frequently say, so he spent so many years out, like not in prison, and didn't reoffend. Obviously, then they would have captured him and put him back in. So to say that he like rehabilitated, maybe that's not the right word, but he sure as shit didn't reoffend.
If I were in a position to, I would consider a clemency request from this person. I don't know how that would, what the process is. It's a Colorado conviction, all right? I don't know what the process is, but he certainly has lived an exemplary life by all accounts, and he's not a threat at age 77. And he didn't serve
Probably not.
He didn't serve all of his time, but there's no need to put him in jail. But that's exactly what they'll do. They'll put him in jail, and they'll try to teach him a lesson about, well, he should not have escaped, and he shouldn't have. But the fact is, yeah, he's not been a nuisance to society. There's no point, but they will. So
yeah, 77. They've made some movies with some old geezers, people your age, running around like committing crimes, robbing. Usually it's like robbing something kind of white collarish, not really, no high speed car chase. Everything is in their little scooters going 2 or 3 miles an hour.
So, well, we'll have to follow this and see what they do with him. But I'm betting that they'll want him to serve out the remainder of his time.
Let's head over to the Washington Post real quick, where you sent this to me a few days ago. It says, Colorado police apologize over viral video of officers handcuffing black girls in a mistaken stop. Do you know what I just noticed, Larry? And I heard a podcast talking about this. Do you notice in the article that black is capitalized?
I didn't pay that any attention.
I didn't at the time either. I've just heard that there's a movement to take things such as black, referring to race, and making it something of a proper case so that you can see it as being important in that regard. I would never have even noticed it had I not heard this podcast in the last week or so, and I didn't notice it when I first looked at it. But anyway, so this is something of a traffic stop, and the car was stolen but no longer stolen. Anyway, they have these four people like cuffed it on the ground face down. This is terrible.
Well, it was children also. That was the sad thing about it for me. It's children, and the police force doesn't look particularly diverse. Did you notice that?
Yeah, I did.
And
I watched the video, and they look. There's a pretty hefty cop there. He did something, and they were not treating them poorly, other than them being face down on the ground. And
well, the gun's
I
drawn
don't know
on
what cops are. This is true. And they are cuffed, but he does have some interaction in the video, and he's not like snatching their shoulders out of socket. I've just, given the circumstances, I mean, he could have been a complete prick.
But what are you estimating the age of the kid?
There's the one on the right, 10, something like that.
Yeah, and that's what's sad to me about it. There's this family,
6 to 17, Larry. So that kid is 6. Maybe there's another one there we can't see so well.
This is very traumatic for a child, and the vehicle that they were driving, as best I can understand it, had been stolen, but it was not stolen at that time. And then the cops are saying, but the same number, the license plate, was stolen, but it was out of another state. The same sequence, but from a different state. But they have these protocols where they treat everybody in a stolen car as a dangerous felon. And I resent that, because children, a 6-year-old is not going to pull something out of their rectum and fire it at the cop. So if the cops would just use a little bit of kindness when they're dealing with children, and there's a couple ways I can think of they could have handled it. They could have had the children exit first and put the children in a safe care, like with social services, till they sort out if the parents are criminals or not. But the children would be given teddy bears and comfort, particularly the small one. And
yes.
and then this lack of diversity. This is why people in the minority communities feel the way they do about cops, because they don't understand why this happened to them. For the cop to run the plate, there was probably some profiling that went on for the plate to be run, for it to show up in NCIC as stolen, which it shouldn't have been in the stolen. So either the cops dropped the ball when that car was originally reporting stolen, didn't remove it from NCIC. But this was a bunch of mistakes, and the police chief, to her credit, apologized, and she said that she wanted to give the cops discretion to not require this type of interaction on a stolen car. Chief, I would say go one step further. Don't just give them discretion, because they'll continue to do this. Require that they not do this, and you tell them the circumstances, like children are not treated this way. You tell them what you don't want them to do. because otherwise they're going to say, for officer safety, I still felt I had to do this. So discretion is not enough. You're going to have to spell it out for them what they're not allowed to do.
And to not sit there for terribly long, we're going to go over to an article from 538, which is one of my favorite publications, Larry. And this says, many Americans are convinced crime is rising in the U.S. They're wrong. And I still think back to, I think it was the first NARSOL conference in Atlanta, and you did your little speech and you threw a FBI chart up there. And it was almost like, I think when Obama was doing one of the State of the Union speeches, someone stood up and said, "You lie." And you said something about crime is the lowest it's ever been, and something or another. Someone stood up and was basically ready to throw tomatoes at you while you were doing your presentation.
Well, and that is why I throw this kind of stuff in there, because you hear about these protests in Portland, Seattle, and you hear about these disturbances, which they're bad. If you live in the area where they're having disturbance can get out of hand, and you can have property damage and loss of human life and injuries. But they act as if that this is the first time in the nation's history that we've ever had any disturbances, any civil unrest. And I said, well, do you know the history of this country? Let's see, we had a civil war, and then we had the civil rights in the 1960s. There were major disturbances. In 1968, when the assassination of Martin Luther King. And then you had the riots in Chicago. You had the 65 Watts riots in L.A. We have had this type of stuff before. And we've had a far higher crime rate in this country than we have at the present time. But for some reason, people don't realize that. They think that crime is just off the charts. And it's not. This is the safest time. Let me say this one more time. This is the safest time to be alive in most of our lifetimes, the time we're in right now, unless you're in a city that has a serious problem, which we have some cities that are having serious crime issues. Chicago, East St. Louis, there's some places where you wouldn't want to be. But this is the best time to be alive for most of our lives.
Why do you think it is that crime has plummeted over the last roughly 40 or 50 years?
Well, I don't know, and I think there may not be a reason. There may be a combination of reasons. It's the demographic change would be part of it. The crime wave that was committed by people in my generation from the baby boomers, they've aged out of crime, and technology's had a lot to do with it in terms of the evolving technology. There's just a whole lot. The solvability of criminal behavior is so much greater now than it used to be. So forensics and video surveillance and all the things that make crimes more solvable, it's hard to get away with crime these days. Think about stealing a car. Can you remember, I don't know if you're old enough, can you remember how easy it used to be to hotwire a car?
Yeah, you would just cross some wires. You're not, you can still do it, but it requires a lot of technology.
Yeah,
to do
try to hotwire a car today and tell me how that works out for you. You could go to your local Ace Hardware or whatever, and you could get a key cut, and the key will go in there, and it will probably start the car. But that's going to be the end of that story. You're not going to be able to get it into gear or anything like that. So technology has changed. Some will argue that our harshness on crime has put people away that were career criminals. They will say, "See, our toughness worked," and so I don't know the answer to it, but I know that crime is down. Has trended down since the late 80s and 90s, and my city, unfortunately, we've had an uptick of crime. We're not at historic levels, but we have had crime has gone up, particular property crimes, burglaries of residences and businesses and stuff. That we're having a real high rate of economic crime in this town, and I think that might be again due to poverty. That could be a contributing factor. We're 49th in per capita income.
Wow. All right, and then I don't even know what to tell you this is. Just go get the show notes, but it's papers.ssrn.com with a bunch of stuff after it. I just really wanted to, there's nothing here that I really want to go into, but it's a research paper that says Me Too and the Myth of the Juvenile Sex Offender. This came across one of the feeds that advocates are into, And I think the gist of it, I think I can just read I conclude with a counterintuitive suggestion that decriminalization and decarceration efforts should not only include conduct labeled as sex offenders, but likely should begin with them. Transforming our approach to sexual harm is one key piece of an abolitionist vision that seeks to move beyond carceral approaches to achieving racial and gender justice. It's a paper that describes that we should probably do the sex offender thing less harsh than what we do.
So
I just wanted to bring it to our people's attention.
That's what I took from it.
And from there, so we spoke to Ethan, that was about Illinois. So then we can move over to Indiana, correct?
Why don't we do Wyoming? Wyoming is way more fun than Indiana.
Very good. Then Wyoming it is. I pretty much trimmed the whole email message. We received an email message from a soon-to-be patron that I'll answer, not soon-to-be, but a soon-to-be that I will announce it later. Became a patron. And but from the email message, it says, I can work from anywhere in the world. I would really like to stay in the United States. There are parts of the government that I do not agree with, but I fought for my country and I am very patriotic. What state can I go to where I can get off of the registry in the least amount of time? I have done my own research, but I feel like you need a law degree to interpret all the statutes from the different states. I can move to any of the 50 states or territories. I do prefer to stay in the continental U.S. And any help you could give me would be greatly appreciated. I do want to point out that even getting these kind of emails, this is like someone asking for almost like personal help. And we are not in that business. But you wanted to bring this in because it's an interesting question that may help other people as well.
It is, because without giving him personal advice, I can tell him what he needs to do to figure out the answer to his own question. And so what we're going to start with is that I did a little cram prep in Wyoming. I hadn't read the Wyoming statutory scheme in a number of years. And just for those who are not familiar with Wyoming, it actually is a state. It has a population of somewhere around 600,000. And geographically, it's quite large. So there's no real urban centers in Wyoming. I think Cheyenne would probably be the largest urban center. And it has, 100,000 people in it or something. And they, at one time, had a decent registration scheme that was risk-based, and most people weren't publicly accessible. And they changed that in 2007. And so what we're going to do, and he's still here, right? We can bring him in if we need to. Okay, so what we're going to do is talk about how you would go about answering that question. And the answer to the question depends on you. I will remember, it's not been that long ago, that early in the pandemic, Governor Cuomo of New York said, what happens to you will largely depend on what you do. And how you what you do here in terms of your unique circumstances is what's important to determine the outcome for you. And the state of Wyoming, the research reveals that they have a 15, 25, and lifetime registration, and they are substantially compliant with the Federal Adam Walsh Act. And this individual would have a 25-year obligation in the state of Wyoming. And so what a person would want to do in a case like this would be to figure out if they would have a shorter obligation in another state for that offense. So that requires a little bit of legal training to figure out how that offense would align in another state. So you would do the analysis to figure out how that would translate to another state, how they treat non-convictions from other jurisdiction, including federal convictions. So you would see how that aligns with that state scheme. Then once you figure out where you think you fall, you may fall in a state where they don't care. It's just a flat out fixed amount of time. It's 10 years. For example, Vermont is 10 years unless you're a repeat offender, and I think there's another category that can get you longer, but the bulk of people in Vermont are 10 years. So that doesn't require a whole lot of legal study and in Vermont to figure it out, but you would figure out. And then the next thing you'd want to know is if you would automatically time off or if you have to petition. The petition's the last thing you want to do, because most of the states, they don't automatically grant the petition, it's a may relieve you, not shall relieve you. And therefore you end up in a conundrum where you have to file a petition. So if I had my ruthers, I would go to a state where I automatically timed out. And if there was such a state that my offense would be 10 years, I would even hope that they gave credit for the offense for the time I was registered in another state. They may or they may not. I think Maine, for example, does give credit. There are some states that don't give credit. Mine doesn't. So you'd start all over. Hypothetically, if you had a 10-year registration obligation, here you'd start from scratch. Now, that particular offense would be a lifetime for my state, so there would be no incentive whatsoever to consider coming to New Mexico, because all you would do is go from a state that has a potential to petition for removal to a state that doesn't, and you'd be a lifetime here and a 25-year in Wyoming. So you would go from bad to worse. So we can rule out New Mexico from the get-go in that particular situation. But let's take a look at the removal process, which is in Dropbox for Wyoming, and you can get it's called Petition for Removal Wyoming.
Yep.
And I've done some highlights in there, and so for a 15-year register in the first section, upon showing that the offender has maintained a clean record as provided in subsection D of this section for 10 years, the district court may order the offender to be relieved of the duty to continue registration. So therefore, those lucky ones that are in the 15-year category, they can get off after 10. And then those which fall into the category that he's in, upon showing that the offender has maintained a clean record as provided in subsection D of the section for 25 years, the district court may order the offender. Now, this is what I pontificate about. The Adam Walsh Act does not require this. There's no petition required. When you reach the 25-year point or the 15-year point, you just simply time out. There was no reason for the state to put this in their law. It wasn't required. They would have gotten their precious AWA compliance without having this in here. So all they did was made it so that people who would have the opportunity just to sunset and disappear like a you-know-what in the wind, they have to spend a whole bunch of money, and they might be able to disappear into the wind. So that I don't like. And then if you scroll down to the bottom, here's the an offender seeking reduction, because in Wyoming they've changed the law that everyone's a lifetime. And then you can get off if you fall into one of the two categories where they can petition. Here's what you have: having no conviction of an offense for imprisonment more than a year, that's in the AWA; having no sex offense conviction, that's in the AWA; and successfully completing any periods of supervised release and probation, parole, and successfully completing sex offender treatment. All of that's in the AWA for a Tier 1 to get that 5-year reduction, because it's a 15-year period with a 5-year reduction if you've done these things. Even a Tier 1 in the AWA would theoretically sunset after 15 years if they didn't do any of these things, except for a conviction, which would roll you up. If they got another sex offense conviction, they would roll up to a Tier 2, because that's the definition of a Tier 2 under AWA standards. If you were previously a Tier 1, you pick up another offense, then you would be a Tier 2 under AWA criteria. But all this wasn't necessary. So again, this is just as bad as California, where I said that very few people, if any, will get off. And this in Wyoming, the only thing that looks good to me in Wyoming is it looks like you can form shop, because it doesn't say you will file where you were convicted. It says you file where you live. So theoretically, if there was such a place in Wyoming that was letting more people off, you could theoretically file. If I read it correctly, you could theoretically file there, but you'd need to talk to a Wyoming practitioner to make sure that I haven't missed something here, because this is not legal advice. This is simply me telling you what I see in black letter. So I would, if I were this individual, I would do some analyzing of what my offense would align in another state that I'm interested in going, and I would see what their processes are, if they just automatically time out or if they have to file a petition. And that's what I would do to figure it out. And I'm happy. That's one of the services that I happen to provide for attorneys that can't figure this out. I help them figure out how their person might get off the registry and if they're eligible.
So what you described, though, you make like a matrix, and like right off the bat, like you said, for New Mexico, we could also immediately mark off Florida because as soon as you show up there, you're going to have to register for life. And you could at least, I don't know, maybe 10 states would be like immediately crossed out almost. And then you start moving down and trying to figure out which one would be the least worstest.
Wouldn't it be better to start to states that you'd like to be in, and then analyze those?
But maybe this person is he doesn't care which of the 57 states that we do have. He just wants to be in one of them that is better than where he is.
Well, why don't we open his mic and ask him if this was helpful and if he has any questions, because we got a little bit of time here.
I will do it. So, Paul, you are now unmuted. So stop cussing and all that. So, welcome, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Do you have any additional questions or feedback to sharpen this whole thing?
Well, first of all, you sound fantastic. I don't know what kind of mic you're, but that sounds the best I've heard.
Well, I make video games, and one of the things for my video games, I also do voiceovers and things like that. So I got a pretty good setu'p.
You sound wonderful.
So you're saying that the microphone matters?
Yes, absolutely.
Huh. Interesting. Who'd have thought?
However, my mic's only like $30, so it's not like I spend a lot of money on a mic.
I understand that too. I've been there.
He's poking fun at me because I wanted to do those. We were on the road a few weeks ago, and I said I'll do the podcast by phone, and he said no way. He said I wouldn't have that kind of crap out there.
Okay, so there's a funny story for that, and this is kind of off topic, but on Wednesday, I was part of a call with the White House about COVID. I can't really talk about what was talked in that because it's not for the press. It was off record. But there was a rear admiral that spoke, and he had to do with logistics, like getting things from point A to point B for the PPE and whatever else people need. And it sounded like he was in like a Humvee or something, and he was talking on a cell phone. And then for a little while, he went completely silent. The whole not podcast, it was like a group call or something. The whole call was dead for about 5 minutes while he was trying to figure out how to fix his mic. So because everyone else was perfect. I mean, we had all these big names in Washington that were part of this call. And, he was just completely, it sounded very unprofessional on his side, which I found very interesting.
So, well, Andy's a big one on sound, and he's really worked to make sure that we sound good in terms of the equipment and the hookup.
Yeah, even though me and Andy disagree with politics, I'm really impressed with him. He does a lot, and he's just amazing from what I can see so far.
Thank you.
But anyways, it helped a lot. If I had my choice, I would live in Florida. If there was no registry and nothing. The reason I say is my parents live there. They're elderly. My mom's very ill. And I would love.
Well, then go to where in Florida? Because you could just be in Georgia. I wouldn't say Alabama, but you could be in the southern part of Georgia and travel.
Oh, that's too far. That's
West Coast, like Tampa.
That's right south of Tampa.
South of Tampa, yeah. He would have to drive a long way to get to
I do go visit them on occasion, and I'm permanently on the internet for being registered in Florida now. Even though
you're already registered there,
like a month at that time, huh?
What did you?
So you're already registered.
What did you do? Spend some time in Florida and register already?
Yeah, I did that when back in 2016. I did that. Me and my kids went down there for the summer. Well, for a month.
Well, you should have registered in that amount of time because they would have frowned on it. But people that
before I went, I do that everywhere I go. As a matter of fact, I tried to go to the Christian Game Developers Conference. It was in Oregon, in Portland, Oregon, and I called. I can't remember who the authority was. I think it was the local police department for that particular sex offender registry authority, and they said there is no restriction on where you can live or be within this state. And you don't have to register because you're not going to be here that long. I said, all right, cool. So I went ahead and called the university that this was going to be at. And they said, we have no restrictions, but it's really up to the organizers. So I called the organizers, and the organizers said, yeah, we don't really want you here. And this was a Christian Game Developers Conference.
Don't get us started on that one. It's like, it's the forgiving people, and they're not very forgiving very often.
I just thought that was entertaining. I looked at Oregon because from what I understand, in Oregon, I would be like a tier 1, and it would be for law enforcement only. It wouldn't even be published. But I don't know if that's accurate because I'm not sure, since I'm coming from another state, if they would take it. On a side note, Oregon's really, really liberal, and it's also very, very expensive. So I don't know if I actually want to live in Oregon. Vermont, on the other hand,
it would be pretty though. It would be beautiful living there though.
Oregon's amazing. It looks very beautiful. Vermont, on the other hand, is one of the ones I looked at. I just wasn't sure. That was actually number 1 on my list. Was Vermont. And I'm glad you mentioned that earlier, Larry, because that's probably. It sounds like a good spot. It also sounds expensive.
It's really not that bad unless you land in the around what is the Burlington where the university is. It's kind of expensive there, but Vermont's largely rural. There's some relatively modest places to live as long as you don't try to get into the college town.
Do they have like restrictions on how far I can live and all that?
I'd have to do some research. Last time I looked at it, the laws did not in Vermont, and of course, with a podcast and us talking about it, their legislature is gonna say, well, we're inviting people to come here, but their laws have been relatively tame in Vermont for a long time. They didn't used to put your street address, even if you were required to be on the internet, and they didn't put everyone on the internet. They've expanded the universe of people that actually get listed, but it has your town. It'll say John Smith, Burlington, Vermont. It won't say John Smith and the street address in Burlington, Vermont. And then you just mail in a form every year. And unless that's changed, that's pretty modest in terms of requirements. And there were no restrictions on where you could live if you're not under supervision. But I would have to update my research.
And speaking of requirements, I don't mind if the requirements are a little bit more strict, as long as I can get off it early. Can I still get off of it at 10 years?
That's the way it was last time I looked. But I would have to see if there's anything changed, because legislatures convene either every year or every other year in some instances. But this is a topic that gets changed regularly. It's registration. If you look at the annotations on statutory schemes, you'll see in some states it's like every year or two they make changes. And so I need to do current research. But I can tell you that Vermont is not going to be anything like the southern states. Like if you compare Vermont to Florida, Alabama, those states, Mississippi, they're really harsh, and they're a little more lenient in Vermont in terms of, and a little more rehabilitation driven, and believing that you actually can rehabilitate yourself.
That's actually
can I throw something in here? I saw this on Reddit. Someone I don't know if the person is on the registry, but someone threw a question out that says, "What is so bad about the registry?" And I want to visit that again. What is if there are restrictions with it, but just going to visit the police every now and then, to me, does it, like, given the grand scheme of things of 1,000-foot, 2,500-foot living restrictions, keeping vehicle logs, all of that other garbage, like, what is the bad part about the quote unquote the registry?
Because we're not in communist North Korea. We served our time. We're done.
Agreed. But as far as like the restrictions imposed, Larry always uses the term disabilities and restraints. I'm not trying to say, oh, we should all just accept that the registry is there and we're going to live with it. I'm not trying to suggest that, but like the actual, like the imposition of it, because you have to go re-register your car. You have to do all of those things that are very similar other than the booking process. But I just, like, it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal.
Well, here it's kind of like the booking process, because once a year you have to get your picture taken and they take you into booking.
Yep,
they did the same thing to me in Florida, but I wanted to say, never mind. I'll collect my thoughts.
If it were simply a matter of putting your name on a list and you never had to be involved with cops again, I do not believe a civil regulatory scheme should involve law enforcement. If you listen to civil regulatory scheme and then you see guns and badges, those two just do not go together. So you're out from the very beginning. It's wrong, because law enforcement shouldn't be involved in civil regulations. They should only be involved if a person doesn't comply, like a restaurant. A restaurant has to have an inspection. They have to have a person come out with their little thermometer and they put it in food, and they go around and do all this stuff. And that's a civil regulatory scheme. If you do not let them into your restaurant, as required by law, they will come with the police. And they will shut you down.
That's a good example, Larry. I like that one.
But it remains civil until you don't comply. Well, if that was all the registry was, if you were barely putting your name on a list, and you were required to mail in a form to update that or go online, which people are quite capable of doing these days, I would say that the registry would certainly be constitutional, and it wouldn't be that bad. But the person who posed that question needs to be told all the things that a person is not allowed to do and that they're required to do, and that's what makes the registry so bad. But the mere act of a registry, they've created a registry for the children of Flint who have been exposed to the bad water that the city manager, that the big great business mind was going to save money by using Flint River water rather than buying water, I think, from the city of Detroit because they were in financial straits and they were going to save a bunch of money. And they saved a bunch of money, all right. But there's a registry for those children. There's nothing punitive about that. They only want to know how the kids are progressing and if they can keep them connected to services and to provide amelioration for any side effects they've had from the lead exposure. That's not a punitive registry. But what the sex offenders, the PFRs, are forced to deal with, that is a very debilitating and punitive registry in most cases.
I have successfully poked the bear.
I have a question about Michigan.
What was your question?
Have you covered this in a previous podcast, by the way?
We've talked about Michigan periodically. What is your question about Michigan? Would you like to go there?
No. But it depends on what the laws are like. Again, Southern Michigan isn't, it's probably kind of similar to the weather we're having here in Wyoming. But as long as I'm not next to a lake. My question is, that whole thing where they declared their SORNA as unconstitutional, and then the federal judge basically slapped them and said, look, either fix this or the registration's going away for people that had crimes before, was it 2012? And I fall into that category. My question is, if I seriously doubt they're not going to do anything. They're probably going to go ahead and fix that, and they're probably going to get extensions and all this other stuff to try to figure it out. But will that affect out-of-state people? Like, if I move there just so I can get off the registry, obviously they're probably going to have issues with
it. It's too early to know how all that's going to play out, but at first blush, I would say that a strong argument can be made that a person moving to Michigan would be protected by the Equal Protection Clause would provide you the same protection as a person who was born and raised there. But Michigan is not likely to just allow those people to vanish. They're going to try to come up with a registry that's constitutional, and we're going to be having the discussion we had out of Pennsylvania. What was that, Andy, 2 episodes back where we got criticism for it sounded like we were in favor of the registry?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're going to come up with the court didn't say you can never register people. The court said in Michigan the 2006 and 2011 enhancements have escalated what was previously interpreted by courts to be a regulatory scheme, has escalated to there's too many disabilities and restraints that it's now punishment, and you can't do that. But they didn't say you can't do this. They merely said you can't do that. And if the Michigan legislature does what I expect they're going to do, they're eventually going to come up with a new that they're going to pass, and they're going to say, to address the court's concerns, this is our new modified registry scheme, and they're going to peel back the onion like they did in Pennsylvania. For example, the proximity restrictions will be lifted for the people who have older convictions, and the frequency of reporting will be reduced like they did in Pennsylvania. That would likely be a fix that they would try.
And that's what I kind of figured they would do, and it's still going to be probably overly restrictive, more so than other states.
They're likely to do no more than they have to, and probably less than what they feel like they should do, because since it's presumed constitutional, you can pass another version, and then, as happened in Pennsylvania, that version would have to be challenged because it's presumed constitutional. We presume, the courts presume, I'm not a court, but we presume that deliberative discussions take place, and that they would not enact something that's unconstitutional, particularly when the law enforcement apparatus and the AG and everybody's telling them, oh, no, this is fine. No, there's nothing unconstitutional about this. So you end up having to start all over again because it's presumed constitutional once it goes on the books.
There's stuff that's been bugging me for years. I'm really glad I'm able to be here. Thanks for having me. One of those things.
Thank you for coming.
Is that so the Supreme Court has declared that the sex offender registry is constitutional, if I remember correctly. Is that actually the case, or is that a political maneuver?
Well, the Supreme Court didn't say exactly the way you describe it. What the Supreme Court said was the scheme that Alaska was operating in 2003, at the time they reviewed their registry, they said this form of registration is constitutional because what we see here doesn't impose any disabilities or restraints. That was the big thing that allowed that scheme to be interpreted as constitutional. They did not say you can pile on, and add on, and pile on different restrictions. They say, looking at this is not much different than renewing a license, and therefore we find this is constitutional. But they fired that warning shot saying because it doesn't impose any disabilities or restraints. But people like Regina Chacon in New Mexico and all over the country, Regina's like her, they continuously, with the support of the victims' advocates, say, add this, add that, add this, add that. I think we've got a Maryland listener will tell you that someone came in and said that they own some property, and they had a sex offender, I should say, owned a property, and that they were visiting it too frequently, and they didn't have to register, so they passed it if they were there like 5 days for more than 5 hours in a 30-day period, or let her describe it, but that person has to register that property. So that means if you own a property and you ever decide to use it for anything other than just a flat-out rental, that you have to put that property on the registry, which would be fantastic. But that's how these things continually evolve because no one's there pushing back when they're debating this. The registry community doesn't have a strong advocate's voice, and they're not there. When the Wyoming legislature passed their first stab at AWA compliance, I believe it was 07 or 08. It was before 2010. There was absolutely no one in the assembly, and I know that because I was communicating with a lawmaker by email from out of state, trying to affect what was the discussion going on in Wyoming because they had that better system. It was risk-based, and they told me, the lawmaker said, no one is here. We haven't heard any of these issues you're raising.
And things have changed since that time too. One thing I noticed about the Wyoming Wyoming legislature and also the statutes for a lot of the different statutes we have and litigation is that it's cookie cutter. They copy and paste, it seems, and then they change a few things to make it more unique to Wyoming. And I don't know if other states do that or not.
Yep,
but
they do.
It's just it just amazes me once I started seeing stuff like that.
Well, that's exactly what they do. There's these model. People think that part-time legislators that have no staff and have a regular day job, they think that they sit around at a candle at night and they're just cranking out this language. They're not. This is language that has been vetted around the country by the National Council, State Legislature, by the Association of Attorneys General, Chiefs of Police Association. This is all stuff that the Federal SMART Office has put out, the Sex Offender Management, Apprehension, Registration, and Tracking, for those that don't know what SMART means, out of D.C. These are all things that have been handed to them, and the law enforcement apparatus says, in order for us to keep getting our burn grants, we have to pass this. And they go to a lawmaker and say, will you sponsor this for me? And the lawmaker says, oh, well, you need this for community safety? Yes. And they agree to sponsor it. And then when they have committee hearings, not a soul shows up in opposition. And they rubber stamp this stuff because there's no one there.
On another note, Wyoming is the least populated state. I think we're number 50. There is... as a ratio, I think we really don't have that many sex offenders within this state. But that's just because of our population, not the ratio, but that's just because our population is so small. So it's hard to get a group together to actually fight.
That would be true. And then you got to get out. Where's the capital? Is it? It's not in. Oh, it is in Cheyenne. I was thinking. There were some people that live on the western part that wanted to move it, but it's in Cheyenne. Okay.
But
then wouldn't it also be easier? I mean, it seems like, if you brought one person to the legislature in California, that's got to be like just a drop in the bucket. But it seems like if you brought one person to Wyoming, you have half the population of Wyoming if you brought one person to the legislature.
It would be very, very persuasive in a small state. Like people don't realize, and when I went to Nebraska a few years ago, actually about 10 years ago now, their place is wide open just like ours. No security. You just walk in the building as if you own it, and you walk around to the legislators' offices. And if they're not in session on the floor, if they're not in committee, they're there ready to talk to you. I had senators in Nebraska. Oh, you're here from New Mexico. What do you want to talk to us about? It's like they were ready to
You're
hear.
A celebrity.
and so in Cheyenne, Wyoming, with a population of less than 600,000, I would dare say that there's not large crowds, and you'd probably have relatively easy access if you could make the journey to the Capitol. And they're only in session like 15 days on 1 year, and like 30 days. They have very short sessions, so they're not there very long. So they have to move very quickly.
Well, I have
Paul. Go ahead.
Sorry. And sorry for saying a lot. It's a bad habit of mine. So, anyways, I think we do have pretty easy access to our elected officials within this state. I am enrolled at the local college, and that is on the registry, which means basically I'm allowed to go there, because of the way the statutes read and all this. But so, he has an office, or my local senator has an office at the college, which is like 10 minutes away. And I've done it before where I just walked into his office and talked to him. So there is easy access to politicians, basically. Whether they would take it or not, I seriously doubt they would, because to me, anytime you want to lessen I look at it from a political point of view. If you want to lessen something within, as for instance, like the registry, you want to lessen it, people are going to use that to try to vote you out of office.
That is correct. Very astute observation.
So that's why I think it's so slow to change, to make it better or less worse for us, better for us, is because it's a political nightmare.
Minefield.
It's easy.
It's a suicide run.
It's easy to increase the regulations. It's easier to increase the regulations than it is to take them away. Correct. Also, this is something else I wanted to discuss. So that decision they made with Alaska at the Supreme Court, it seems like they used that decision to decide on other matters. Like that decision set precedents for basically people saying that the sex offender registry is constitutional. Is that just me seeing something that's not there, or is that what people are doing?
That is absolutely. It is precedent. It's binding precedent. It is so. It did, but again, it didn't say that any form of registration you want to impose is constitutional. It said, as we look at the Alaska scheme, the scheme that we're examining, this scheme is constitutional. Then it's up to the attorneys who are challenging registration around the country to distinguish when you are arguing a case, and precedent is what's guiding you. If you want to win, and precedent's not in your favor, you have to distinguish what you're arguing and why it's different. And so many of our challenges go wrong because they're brought in the case in a criminal case, which doesn't allow the evidentiary record to be fully developed in terms of expert testimony, in terms of things that you need to do. Someone has no money and they go to the public defender for their conviction, and then they go back and say, well, this registry is really awful, and the public defender, I'll file a motion, say it's unconstitutional. And we end up with all these bad decisions because they weren't properly brought. The correct way to bring a challenge to the registry is to file a petition for declaratory judgment and have gobs of money to put the case together and distinguish for the record before it goes up on appellate review, because the trial judge is going to find the registry is constitutional, because the trial judge has to go by the precedent. So all the precedents in the states, practically, there's been previous state Supreme Court decisions that have said our registry is civil regulatory. And then there may have been dozens of amendments that have happened since that. Like in our case, the last time our appellate court in New Mexico looked at registration in a global fashion was in 2003 in the case of State versus Dructinus. Well, much has changed since 2003. We had a major overhaul in 2005 that imposed a lot longer period of registration, more intense reporting requirements, and it changed a lot. But since then, there hasn't been any precedential decisions on properly developed cases. There was one case that I helped as an expert witness where a person filed it within the criminal case. So the precedent is binding unless you do a good job distinguishing why this is different than Alaska. You don't just say, well, I feel it's unconstitutional. You prove that it's unconstitutional, and here's why. And you expect to go up on appeal. You expect to be like in Michigan. This took effect in 2012. And I believe it was until late 2017 before the case was finally decided in Doe versus Snyder. So it was a 5-year journey.
And they still didn't do anything. He had to come back and say, look, you didn't do anything, do something.
And they're going to still go. They're going to keep delaying, and then they're going to eventually do the minimum necessary to preserve the registry. And then I'll have people writing ugly emails to me saying, "Why am I that way?" Because that's just the reality of the situation. I don't make the rules. I'm just telling you what politicians are likely to do because that's what the public demands.
Politicians' agenda is to get reelected. So
that is correct.
Kind of. I see why they're doing it. I just disagree with it. But again, that's just the way it is. I want to thank you for your time and thanks for answering my questions. It looks like I'm going to be moving to Vermont. I'm going to look closer into that and do some more research and make some phone calls.
I ask people, don't make phone calls. The last thing the way you really hurt a state is they keep a tally list of how many people inquire about wanting to relocate there. And all you do is cause the tally to grow larger and larger and larger of people who are inquiring about our lax laws and say they're going to move here. You act as if when you move to another state that you got brought there by circumstances totally beyond your control and you have no idea of what their registry is like. But it really hurts the cause when you go in and say, oh, well, what can you tell me about your registry? Oh, would you like to have some out-of-staters come here? It's kind of bad around here. Your laws don't look so bad. That really is detrimental to the cause.
A question about the out-of-state thing. I'm sorry to keep going with this. My original conviction was in Montana. When I got out of prison, I went to a halfway house in Wyoming because it was the closest one that would accept sex offenders. They didn't have any at that time that would accept sex offenders in the state of Montana. So I transferred, or I didn't transfer. I did my halfway house time here in Wyoming. And I didn't have any I didn't have any family here. I didn't have any connections. I didn't have any support. I built that while I was in the halfway house. I built a good support system. And I was able to get my location changed from Montana to Wyoming through the probation office.
Well, but you have a federal conviction, which changes all that dynamic.
Yes. Yep. So does it matter where my original conviction was?
In terms of what?
In terms of changing states to like Vermont, for instance.
Well, it would depend on, again, how Vermont, how they treat out-of-state offenders. They non-Vermont convictions. Each state has some provision in their state statutory scheme how they deal with out-of-state offenders. Sometimes they apply equivalency tests. Sometimes they say that you have to register for the duration of the state of conviction. You don't have a state of conviction. You have a federal conviction. So we would have to look at the Vermont law and find out how it would apply to you. But calling the registration office is really a bad thing, and I want to emphasize that. People are tempted to do that all the time. First of all, they don't know, and second of all, they do not want you to come there. I mean,
thanks for telling me not to go. I actually wrote that down, circled it, put an asterisk.
Well, I mean, think about it. If you're in state at a state, would you want to invite as many people as you possibly could that have sex offense convictions, knowing that there's going to be some level of recidivism, whether it's 3%, 2%, 4%, or 8%, it doesn't matter. If you invite 100 people, you're going to have some level of sex offenses that occur there. Nobody in their right mind is going to say, oh, well, you have it kind of bad in Louisiana. Of course we'd like to have you here. They're not going to do that.
And that's
Paul, thank you so much, and I appreciate you coming on kind of impromptu after we had the baseline discussion.
I greatly appreciate it. I just sent that email, and y'all responded really quickly. So I do greatly appreciate it. Invite
Larry liked it.
I liked it. It was a good one.
Thank you very much, and thanks for all your expertise.
Our pleasure.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Ready to be a part of Registry Matters? Get links at registrymatters.co. If you need to be all discreet about it, contact them by email, registrymatterscast@gmail.com. You can call or text a ransom message to 747-227-4477. Want to support Registry Matters on a monthly basis? Head to patreon.com/Registry Matters. Not ready to become a patron? Give a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Or tell your buddies at your treatment class about the podcast. We want to send out a big heartfelt support for those on the registry. Keep fighting. Without you, we can't succeed. You make it possible. Joining us now, Larry, is Ethan from Illinois, who I'm going to do the best I can at introducing this. It has questions about federal supremacy over what the states do, and I'm going to sit back and let you guys go at it because this is way beyond my pay grade. But welcome, Ethan. Thank you much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me on here.
All right, Ethan, we received an email from you back in July, asking some questions about the registry and about why the federal requirements are different than the state requirements. And I thought, since it's a very commonly asked question, that we could possibly dig into a little bit and see if we can be helpful to a whole lot of people out there listening, rather than just talking to you individually off the air, which I'm always willing to do, but we have a chance to enlighten others.
Well, sure. This mostly started from the idea in Illinois I'm required for lifetime registration. And so I always wondered if there was a case to be made in terms of federal supremacy, because the actual federal SORNA statute classifies me as a Tier 2 and states my full registration period as 25 years.
And that is a really, really fantastic question. And the answer is, in my opinion, there is no supremacy clause argument because there is no federal registry. So in the absence of a federal registry, the federal registry could not be supreme. And so what you have in the case of federal SORNA is you have a list of recommendations to the states that say within this framework, if you do at least this minimal level of compliance, your state will be deemed substantially compliant, so you don't jeopardize your burn justice crime assistance funds. But as we'll talk about later in another segment of the podcast, you can go beyond that, and that's just fine because you met the minimum. So in terms of can you say that you'd be a Tier 2 under federal law? I'm assuming that you've analyzed it correctly because you're an intelligent guy from conversations I've had. But that being the case, that would be a 25-year minimum obligation, but it's not a maximum. It's merely a floor that the state would have to have for that offense to be classified correctly under AWA standards.
Makes sense. So even though the federal law mentions the word requirement, they're talking about requiring at the minimum level, but not the maximum.
That is correct. And most everything that they're talking about, these are requirements on the states and the jurisdictions. It's not just states or jurisdictions. So when you hear requirements for your state, when you're looking at the Adam Walsh Act and the SORNA component of the Adam Walsh Act, you're looking at requirements on the jurisdictions to have a substantially compliant registration program. There's very little that applies to the offender. And I bring up the part that's most important to the offender, and that's the traveling across jurisdictional boundaries and not presenting yourself for registration. That's the key, the biggie of all ones that's in there, that people, when you move from one jurisdiction to the other, or if you're physically present in some cases too long in one jurisdiction, you have a federal duty to present yourself to that jurisdiction. But all these things in terms of what's required, these are requirements on the state to be substantially compliant.
Right. I actually have some experience with that. I live close enough to the Missouri border that I work in Missouri, and so I get to deal with both states' registration systems. I'm actually required to register more often in Missouri, even though I don't live there, than I am in Illinois.
Now that's a good thing to point out for the listeners, because in the case of the Adam Walsh Act, you could have an obligation to register in multiple jurisdictions because it defines an offender as anyone who is not only living or residing in a state, but if you also are attending school or employed. And you can have the opportunity to do both depending on geographically where you are. And that may be your situation where you have a duty that's triggered in Missouri, but yet you don't live there. And then Missouri's requirements or what's imposed upon you different than Illinois, and you can't go to Missouri and say, well, I don't really like this in Illinois, I don't have to do that. They say, well, simply stay out of our borders and you won't have to do any of that stuff here.
Here's an interesting question for my situation. Let's say that Illinois didn't require the lifetime registration in my case, but only required me to be on for 10 years. I would no longer be required to register in Illinois where I reside, but I would still be working in Missouri. So have you had any experience with how that would work in terms of being registered in Missouri for the job?
You would have an obligation, a person would have an obligation in Missouri if their version of SORNA defined your conviction as a registrable offense, meaning the offense you committed was equivalent or in some cases just simply the fact that you have a sex offense. If they have a duty to register in Missouri, they could care less about what happened in Illinois. The 10 years went by, you're still working in Missouri, you would still have to register there because their law controls.
Right, so it isn't tied exclusively to where you reside. It's any laws that cover any aspect of what you're doing, basically.
I think more succinctly to put it would be any criminal conduct that fits within the statutory definition of a sex offender in a particular jurisdiction. And if Missouri has a law that covers your particular offense and the zone of time that offense occurred, then regardless of whether Illinois had discharged you from obligation, you would still have to register. Then that brings back what I say time and time on the podcast. Had you been free from all registration in Illinois before you ever set foot in Missouri, you wouldn't be going there as a handed-off offender. So they wouldn't know. There would not be any magic knowledge the minute you crossed the Missouri border that you had a conviction in the past. But they could easily discover you by someone ratting you out that did know and says, did you know he's working at such and such a place? Or they could do a routine traffic stop and decide that based on the circumstances, they're going to do a criminal history, and they could discover the sex offense. But without a handoff, if you were going to a new state as an unregistered person, the chances are real good that all you would get would be a notice of a duty to register. If they were to run your background, if you've been properly discharged in State A, State B is going to say, well, that's not binding on us, and we're going to notify you have to register. And if you don't register, you are going to be prosecuted. I've got the challenge out asking for someone to show me that they've been discharged from registration by some mechanism in one State A, and that they've been in State B and they were prosecuted without being given notice. Now, I'm open to having someone demonstrate that to me, but so far no one has been able to demonstrate that that's been the case, and I continue to believe you would get a notice of a duty to register in Missouri.
All right. Well, another question that I brought up in the email had to do with when the clock basically started on the 25-year issue. And one of the things in SORNA mentions that your clock starts when you're no longer in custody. And so I had a question of whether supervised release in the federal sense or state parole or probation would count as still being in custody.
That's a really great question, and the answer is yes and no.
Thanks, Larry.
The answer is yes, unless the state says no, it doesn't. Some states particularly say that the registration term shall be computed from release from supervision requirements. I think Brenda's state may say that, or did at one time. And some states, like my state, it would count from the time you initially registered without any credit for any registration in a previous jurisdiction. So the answer is it would be fact specific to what that state gives you credit for. But as a general rule, I think more states give you, they've recognized your period of registration from when they initially registered. Now, as I perused, did some quick perusing before recording, some states give you time out for any period you're in custody. We don't do that in my state. If you're in custody, it makes no difference. Once you initially registered, theoretically, you could spend the entire 25 years or whatever your period it was. In my state, we don't have a 25-year, but you could spend your entire 10 years in custody. And the only thing the Department of Public Safety would argue that would possibly save them in our state, it says you shall complete the tenure registrants have to complete an annual renewal, and they would say that since you didn't report in for your annual renewal, that year doesn't count. But there's no particular timeout. There's no tolling, which some state statutes do toll. But if you don't have a tolling provision, and it doesn't specifically say that post-release from supervision, then you would get credit for that 25 years. So that's the answer as best I can give it with the information I have.
Sounds good. Those were the two primary questions I had. I know we had discussed a couple of other things that were more specific to my situation, but I didn't know if you wanted to get into those or just stick to the general topics.
I don't mind as long as we don't have to delve into it to the point where I would be giving legal advice, and then also to your comfort level, how much you want to talk about your personal situation. But as long as I don't get myself in trouble, I don't mind.
Well, one of the things that I had mentioned, I had brought up that rule and you about the being classified as a sexual predator if you move to Illinois, and I found the statute that covers that. So in Illinois, after January 1st of 2012, if a person moved to Illinois on or after that date, they will be considered a sexual predator with lifetime registration. If that person was required to register in another state, even if they would have been considered under the 10-year plan in Illinois.
So any conviction that relocates to Illinois after 2012 is a sexual predator?
That's what
Really?
the statute says.
I'd like to take a look at that.
Yeah, I can give you the public act number and everything.
Yeah, why don't you shoot that to us, and we'll circle back on this on the following podcast. And that's an interesting thing that I've never heard of.
Yeah, and I had mentioned that because I was classified that way because my original conviction was in Missouri, and then when I was released from the federal system, I ended up in Illinois, which is where my family is currently.
Well, you have a federal conviction, right?
Correct. Yeah, my conviction was in the federal. The state dropped their case and passed me off to the federal system.
So yeah, I'll take a look at that, and we can circle back and
So wait
talk
a minute.
about
So
this
if
again.
somebody is convicted of, and I know this is like bullshit, but if someone is convicted of urinating in public and they end up on the registry and they move there, they're considered a violent predator?
Yeah, it says, what the actual act says, that after that date, a person moves to Illinois on or after the effective date, the person is considered a sexual predator with lifetime registration if the person is required to register in another state due to a conviction or other action of any court, to register as a sex offender, which is Illinois' 10-year branch, sexual predator, or substantially similar status under the laws of that state.
Okay.
Sounds like if you made obscene phone calls to a minor in Georgia, you would be a sexual predator.
Larry, that's absolutely insane. Now, see, as you say, Larry, now that's funny.
Well, I have to admit that is funny.
That's diabolical. Jesus.
Well, Illinois also has some other fun ones. They one of the issues I had when I was initially being released from federal custody was trying to find a place to live so that they could transfer me from Missouri to Illinois. My original plan was to stay with my father, but he lives in an apartment complex which has a bike path going nearby, and so that was excluded because in Illinois they include bike paths as public parks. And so I was fortunate in that I had a friend who had a relative who was a landlord willing to rent to me, and so that we worked that out. But I was initially excluded from my plan to move to Illinois because there was a bike path too close to my father's residence.
That is unbelievable.
Now that is, I thought I had heard it all, and I always have. I have this thing where I call up my colleagues and I say, I have heard it all. Now I've got to call my colleagues after this podcast and say, I have heard it all now.
We've been talking about Illinois for some time, though, because they have a pretty tyrannical scheme going on up there.
Yeah, that's what's keeping Weinberg and Adele busy. Mark and Adele busy. Yeah,
despite some of the nonsensical stuff that I have to deal with over here, I've actually I consider myself fortunate in my situation in some ways. I have an officer who doesn't seem to be out to get me, and generally the local police leave me alone. So in that sense, it's not too tyrannical, but some of the rules here are pretty out there.
So Ethan, this is really helpful because we're trying to get more of this podcast into the prison institutions where they can't listen to it. And this type of discussion is going to be very interesting to the people who want to know, what is registration like? We get that question all the time at DARSAL. What do I have to do? And I said, well, you have to do what they tell you. And of course, they want a little more specific information about what all the things that they might tell them. And this type of interaction and exchange will help people understand what it is they're going to be told to do and what they're facing in terms of barriers. And the bike path I have not heard of yet.
Yeah, in Illinois, it's parks, which is any park, not just a park that has a playground like it is in Missouri. They also include forest preserves, bike paths, trails, or conservation areas under state or local jurisdiction.
Well, we have an extensive bike trail network in Albuquerque, so that would knock out a whole lot of territory here because, I mean, we've got 70, 80, 90 miles of bike paths within the metro area.
I'm sure that was the intent in Illinois also. My father happens to live near one of the college campuses, and that's why he has bike paths all over the place near his house.
So, too much, Ethan. I've heard it all.
All right. Well, those were really my questions. I wasn't sure if you had any for me or.
We may have you back again on this after you send me the statute. Let me look at the statute about. I just can't believe that they could make you a predator just because you have an offense in another state. I've got to see that and analyze that.
Oh, yeah, I'll be happy to send that email as soon as I get off here with you guys, and I'd be happy to come on again and talk about it if you want.
I appreciate that.
I don't. I'm still really mostly dumbfounded by if you have felony jaywalking and that's listed as a sexual offense somewhere and you move to Illinois and now you're a predator.
Well, the best analogy is the obscene phone calls to a minor in Georgia. Yeah,
that's crazy. Ethan, thank you so very much for taking the time to be with us tonight, and maybe we'll hear from you soon on the podcast.
That sounds great. Thanks for having me on again.
Larry, it is, I guess we're going to move on to some other state. Indiana, is that where we're going?
Yeah, this one shouldn't take long. This one's funny.
Oh, we're back to funny. So is this like being on the lam for 47 years and now you're 77 years old? Like that kind of funny?
It's even a better funny.
A better funny. All right, tell me what's going on in Indiana.
Well, this is an appellate level decision for a person that the I've had the county name at the tip of my. Anyway, make sure I got the right case here. Hope you can cut this out of here.
There's video going on. It makes it really hard to cut anything out.
Well, don't tell me your problems. Just find a solution. But this is where the person moved with out-of-state convictions, and the state of Indiana decided that he was a sexually violent predator. But they did not follow any process whatsoever. They just took a look at the fact that he had 2 convictions from Florida. And by the definition of the statute, he did not qualify as a sexually violent predator. Those offenses, one of them was consensual, which didn't qualify under Indiana law, but they arbitrarily notified him, the sheriff of Vanderboro. I never heard of that, but anyway, the sheriff's department notified him that he was a sexually violent predator, and he was not amused, and he challenged that, and he won because of the extra obligations that are imposed on a person who is a sexually violent predator, and
something like registering every 3 months or silliness like that.
Yes, but the thing is, this is scary. That they had a process. They were supposed to notify him that they intended to change the information about him, and he would have had an opportunity to appeal, but he didn't. So then the state comes in and says, well, he didn't exhaust his administrative remedy. Well, of course he didn't, because they didn't follow the administrative process to start with. They didn't do administratively what they were supposed to do. So the court forgave him for not exhausting the administrative process to challenge it, because they didn't follow the administrative process to begin with. And they said, sorry, he doesn't meet the definition of a sexually violent predator. You guys invented this. So people
almost like what we were talking about in Illinois. If you just show up and you have, felony urinating in public, then you're a violent predator. Like, by what? I mean, this sounds similar to that. It
is, except he actually had 2 offenses in Florida.
I gotcha.
But he still didn't qualify. The one, he put his hands inside a pants of a 10 or 11-year-old, which and did fondling, but apparently no penetration. The other one, he had consensual romance, but it was with someone close to his age, and he did not fit the criteria, and they didn't follow the process, and they just said, you don't like it, too bad, you're a predator. And he said, no, sir, I'm not, and he won, and so kudos to him. Kudos to Spencer.
And appellate level, this is still within the state, so then it would go to the state Supreme Court next?
If the state wants it to go, they could ask the top court to review it. I don't know why they would. This is black letter law. They got resoundingly slapped by the Court of Appeals. I don't know why they would, because there's nothing to appeal. You guys blew it. Let go of it. You screwed up. You didn't follow process. He's not a predator. You'd like him to be. He isn't. Move on. But you never know what these people are going to do.
And kick rocks. And they have, effectively unlimited budgets, and maybe it'll make them happy and sleep better at night. They're not going to let one escape the system, damn it.
Nope. Not going to do it.
I don't think we have any other content other than doing the thank yous and the goodbyes and all that stuff. Is there anything we've missed?
Well, we have gobs of thank yous. So did we get like 50 patrons this week?
We did. It's pretty close to that. But first, let me throw this out there. So Sunday morning, I finished editing the podcast pretty early, and Super Patron Mike had said, hey man, I'm on my way to church and just got the notification of the RM podcast. And people say there's no God. I beg to differ. Good things come to those who sign up on Patreon. Yes, if you're a patron, you would get the podcast when I finish editing it on Sunday morning, usually. So I just wanted to share that because it was kind of funny.
So, well, thank you, Super Patron Mike.
We got kind of like a old new patron coming back, Patty. She had to update her credit card. I just wanted to point it out because she then sent me a personal note saying, hey, I love the podcast and my credit card has expired. Anyway, welcome back, Patty. We got a new patron, Deborah. Thank you so very much. She I guess she wants to get a transcription sent.
And she got it. We sent out a batch of transcripts Friday. And her loved one was on the list. And again, this is a good opportunity to promote that. If you are supporting the podcast at $15 a month or higher, we will send the transcript to a person of your choice. You just have to let us know. We don't have a fancy form when you sign up on Patreon. We don't have any way to capture that. So you have to email us and say, I'm one who's supporting you at that level or higher, and I would like to receive it. And I will make it happen. So we sent out, I think it's 20 or 21 yesterday. Some were freebies because I'm trying to promote the concept, and some are people that have met the requirements and requested it.
And then, of course, we just we're talking to Paul, and that was impromptu, and so I had this slated here at the end. But holy poop, Paul, you're a beast. Thank you. And I put in their turtles all the way down, so anybody that's into like computer coding will get that reference. But for the rest of you lay people, go figure it out.
So I'll do my best to figure it out, and I'll let you know next week. And
there's your homework assignment, Larry.
Well, and then I have a congratulations to make to someone. Someone figured out who I am with the picture. Yes. They figured that out, and I want to award a prize to that person because I gave clues, but I didn't expect anybody to figure it out. I had said in the Lincoln administration, so. By whatever method they figured it out, they figured out that that was Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. Now, I'm going to give you another challenge. The person that figured it out, of course, you're in the running. Figure out some unique aspect of Stanton's career that would appeal to me because I said he was my favorite official in the Lincoln administration. So figure out what it is about him. And there were many things. There were several things I liked about Stanton, but tell me what you think attracted me to his service to the United States.
You want me to clue you in on something that is going to possibly upset you?
What's that?
We have said on the show who that is.
Well, I know we have. But
okay. So
but
somebody has been a listener for any level of regularity would have heard and seen the picture, and because I've been doing the picture thing, the video thing for 2-ish or 3 months.
But if they've listened to every single episode from beginning to end, and I don't think we've got patrons who do that with regularity.
No, see, I beg to differ. We have people that have listened to episode 1 and have stuck with us ever since.
We have people who've listened to all of them, but not every single word of all of them, and not all of our listeners have. But yeah, so figure out by my personality and what you've heard, what I would be attracted to Stanton about. He was a very, very unique individual in terms of his career.
Can I win, or am I excluded?
And I'll tell you,
you always hear in prize competitions, like family members can't apply and whatever, if you work for the station, whatever.
He would have been seated on the U.S. Supreme Court, but he wasn't. He died after his nomination. But he had a splendid career.
So he was nominated, though.
Yeah, he was nominated, but he did not live long enough. He died relatively young, I think like 58 or 59. But he would have been a Supreme Court justice. So tell me about Stanton. What did he do that was unique?
Excellent. Well, we record the show live on Saturday nights, and if you are a patron, you can come listen to it. Otherwise, you should subscribe to the show on all of your podcast apps. You can find it anywhere. You can find it on your smart speaker. So if you just want to speak into the ether, a friend of mine's mom listens to the show, Larry, because she is very visually impaired, and she invokes the Google thing in the house, which actually, we haven't had Charles join us for a long time, but for someone that is visually impaired, having one of those smart speakers is probably one of the best inventions, to just be able to say, hey, listen to the podcast, and it starts playing it for you. Be a great thing. So anywho, generally the people can have it for the morning commute. Most people are probably commuting from their bedroom into their office at this point. So it's a long commute, and it's very treacherous at this point. But Larry, where can people find the podcast?
You will go to registrymatters.co.
Fantastic. We didn't get any voicemail this week, Larry, but where would people phone in and leave voicemail? That
would be 747-227-4477. If we don't get any this coming week, we will disconnect the hotline.
And if you would so choose, you can record a higher quality one by just using your phone and record an MP3 and then send us the MP3 over email or something. That would work too, and it would sound way better than the telephone, because the telephone sounds like crap, Larry. Please tell me that you agree that the telephone sounds like crap.
Well, having studied the comparison, I would say that I would agree with you that the quality is less than stellar.
It is. And where can they email us?
That'd be registrymatterscast@gmail.com.
And of course, we love all of our listeners, and we love all of our patrons, especially our patrons. And where do they go to sign up on Patreon for as little as $100 a month? Did you say?
It'll be $1,200 until the pandemic is over. So that is patreon.com/registrymatters, and we need to spell that at patreon.com.
Fantastic. You can also find us on YouTube. It gets released there, and where else? You could also follow us on Twitter. I don't do a whole lot there, but sometimes I throw some stuff up there. And I think that's all we got, Larry.
So I think it is. Now we're going to roll into a political dialogue in the patron only.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Have a great night. Talk to you soon, Larry.
Good night.
You've been listening to FYP.